So I'm now going to move on to agenda item 16, the results management framework. And we've got two jobs to do under this item. We've got, having heard from the evaluation unit, where they think we've got to on the results management framework, and they've made some recommendations. We have a decision to that effect that we've heard from them. And then we're going to hear the management report from the staff that says what they make of those evaluations and what they think the next steps are so that they can come back to us, first of all at B23 with a mainly fully fledged proposal to conclude at B24. So that's what the job is in this next segment. So first of all, I would like Joe to start with the evaluation. What have we learned? Then we're going to hear from staff what we should make of that, and then we're going to go to the two decisions on the learning part and on the next steps. So off you go, Joe, and I know you're always very sparing in your words, but move us just as fast as you think is sensible. Thank you. Or as soon as the tech will work.
Sorry, Coach, I need some help with the presentation slides. No, it's not coming on. Can someone from IT help me out, please? Kindly bear with me, Chair. Just we need some technology help. Okay. I've got it. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to present the review of the results management framework on behalf of the IU. I want to acknowledge at the beginning the support and the collegial inputs that were provided by the Secretariat in a timely way. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, Andres Royman, Lisa Otlakan, and Aaron Zazueta, who were instrumental in putting this review together. As always, we want to stress that the IU evaluations and reviews are essentially directed at making GCF stronger, faster, smarter. The decision for the IU to undertake this review was taken at B19. As a recap for board members and others, the GCF's results management framework basically consists of two result areas that are mitigation and adaptation, and they're supported by a range of indicators that are articulated in the performance measurement framework. So for the purposes of this evaluation and review, we considered both the results management framework and the performance measurement framework, both of which are board-approved documents and which should be read together, because the PMF essentially has indicators in them. There are a total of 43 indicators that are used to inform the overall result areas of the GCF. There are 2 paradigm shifting objectives, 4 core indicators, impact indicators, etc. Important thing is, one of the things that the review found is that there are a subset of indicators that have been approved by the board and others that have been noted by the board. But for practical purposes, these are looked at equivalently by people who are using them. So they don't differentiate between those that are approved and noted. Overall, we find that the results management framework, and I use that word to indicate that this is meant to be viewed in a combined way, so the RMF is to be combined with the PMF, is a flexible menu of indicators. It has 4 core indicators, and essentially users can pick from these. The outputs are left to the accredited entities to specify in terms of indicators, and frankly, it's not burdensome at all at the project level, because on an average, GCF projects report up to 4 to 6 indicators, which is not onerous. I'm now going to go into some of the areas that we found were deficient and definitely could be improved, especially in terms of implementation. So we looked at a range of criteria that the GCF uses and has been endorsed for the IU. The first one is relevance and coherence. We find first that there is an absence of definitions, protocols, and internal as well as external guidance on these indicators. So definitions and protocols in terms of how to measure indicators, when to measure them, with what frequency, and who. And this is important, not just for our external partners, but also internally. There is a range of experiences as well as understanding of what these indicators mean. Second, as you all may know, there is a causal logic that is specified in the results management framework for both mitigation and adaptation. There are several inconsistencies and incompletenesses in these causal logic models, which can be dealt with quite easily by the Secretariat, and we point those out, and I'll talk about these very shortly. But currently, we find that the results management framework is quite marginal, actually. It's not used beyond classifying projects into overall result areas. So what's mitigation, what's adaptation, and that's essentially it. But it's not really used for managing for results. Just as an example, this is an example of a causal logic model for the adaptation framework. I don't want you to read it at all. Just a couple of things that I want you to take away from here is that in the overall logic model, there are indicators that are present at the outcomes level and impact level and then at the paradigm shift objective level. That's very good. But there are things that are classified currently at the outcome level that definitely need to move to the impact level. And I'm only giving you one example here, but we've basically made many other constructive suggestions, we hope, in our fairly detailed review. We also find that the logic models completely ignore enabling conditions. So, for example, the IPCC report, especially with respect to the private sector and climate change projects, note the importance of leveraging additional finance as well as technology in creating enabling conditions for the private sector to work, especially with adaptation, but also in mitigation. The current causal logic models don't pay attention to those sorts of enabling conditions that can be created and should be focused on by the GCF, especially for adaptation, where the linkage between the potential contribution of the private sector to adaptation can be really galvanized to a large extent, but is currently ignored in the causal logic, and we think to some extent, therefore, also in the investments that GCF makes. So overall, currently there's an incorrect classification as well as theory around adaptation mitigation logic models. We also think that currently the core indicator, especially around adaptation, requires a rethink. So the current core indicator around adaptation is the total number of indirect and direct beneficiaries. From our perspective, GCF can do better. It has and can show leadership in this space and can be a thought leader and must engage with the world community as well as state-of-the-art methods to define this in a much better way. Enabling conditions are currently ignored in the logic models, and this also then discounts some of the important work the GCF investments do, but don't speak to the logic models and vice versa. And the private sector and adaptation link is also discounted. In terms of effectiveness, Chair, we find that, yes, at an overall level, the results management framework is sufficient for classifying projects. But again, like I said, they help to classify between mitigation and adaptation. But if you drill down further, remember as well that there are cross-cutting projects. And for cross-cutting projects which require both mitigation and adaptation-related indicators, they prove to be insufficient. There's also absence of guidance on these indicators, which means, for example, that there is double counting and non-aggregability, which defeats the purpose of having an indicator framework, because one of the ideas behind an indicator framework is also to be able to say at the GCF level as to what impact we are making. But because of the absence of guidance, protocols, etc., we can't really aggregate it across our investments. We further find that, especially for cross-cutting projects, there is a large percentage of projects, so 13 of the 18. And we'd completed this analysis before B21, Chair. And at that time, there were 74 projects. But basically, for 13 of the 18 cross-cutting projects in our portfolio will not be able to report their target results because of the absence of what they are planning just in their project documents. We also found that there is a significant underplanning in terms of what projects want to measure and credibly report to the GCF. Overall, 40% of GCF's current investments will not know if targeted impacts will occur. So they are directing their investments at certain impacts, but because of underplanning and lack of baselines and specification of indicators, the GCF will not know if these impacts are indeed occurring. We further find that in GCF investments, half of our projects do not plan to collect baseline data. 90% will be unable to or will dramatically overstate results, primarily because they don't consider the role that bias plays in credible reporting, measurement, and contribution. And 3/4 of our funded projects do not have sufficiently well-articulated monitoring and evaluation plans. Overall, for the results management framework then, Chair, I'm going to talk now about strengths, some easy wins, and then some significant changes that are required. In terms of strengths, we think that the menu is flexible, not burdensome. The indicators are there, but the challenges are in implementation, and that needs to change. We think as well that there are top core indicators that can and should be headlined by the board. Definitely, at the impact level and at the paradigm shift level, there are core indicators that should be headlined by the board. But for all else, we think that currently the Secretariat has the requisite expertise to specify technical definitions and requirements, as well as specify the indicators themselves. And that work should definitely be completed, because this is also a larger responsibility of the fund. Then there are some missed opportunities, but represent easy wins for the GCF. We think that it's possible to address the logical inconsistencies and incompleteness in the current framework. We also think that it is possible to remedy the non-aggregability of results through development of protocols, when something should be measured, how, by whom, with what frequency, etc., and that should be specified in protocols and can be done easily. There are some other low-hanging fruits. For example, the fund has paid great attention to gender action plans, as well as gender policy. However, these need to be incorporated and mainstreamed into the results management framework. We also think it's important for the Secretariat to focus on developing far more focused project design guidance, especially in terms of asking for baseline data collection and theories of change, etc. There is an additional opportunity of connecting GCF project results management frameworks with country systems where they are strong. So we recognize that not all countries have strong in-country data systems, but where they are strong, This represents a huge opportunity for the GCF to link to them, as well as take advantage of data collection, as well as capacities in country to inform our own measurement and impact. Where significant changes are required, Chair, are that currently there is a large number of frameworks that investments look at within the GCF to essentially articulate their results or impacts or changes. There's the results management framework. It's associated with the performance measurement framework. There's the monitoring and accountability framework. There's the risk management framework. There is also the investment criteria, etc. But as a consequence, there's no single coherent, consistent framework for managing results. The results management framework itself cannot be used to assess the effectiveness and efficiency of GCF investments. And this needs to change. And the primary gap here is essentially the way the results management framework is actualized and implemented and operationalized, both internally as well as externally. We also think that the private sector and the linkage of the private sector with the RMF requires attention, and there needs to be a rethink of the adaptation core indicator. Lastly, Chair, we're saying that the results management framework in its current form cannot be used for the second level of due diligence role that the Secretariat currently has. The board decision in front of you, Chair, and respected board members, the key points are that the board takes note of the findings and recommendations presented in the IU report, takes note of the Secretariat's management response, and directs that the Secretariat present to the board at B24 a report on the implementation on the IU's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. I want to move straight to the management response before I come to the Eamon. Are you objecting to? If you can, thank you. Go ahead, Sahel.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Just cutting over with the IT glitch. Yes. Rahman is here. Look at the USB stick. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kocha. Yeah, thank you. The Secretariat, having reviewed the IU's findings and recommendations on the RMF, has the following recommendations or observations. In general, the Secretariat finds the review useful and agrees with the IU's findings on both the design and application of the framework. However, we may not necessarily agree to the degree and the magnitude of the gaps reported. We also would have liked more guidance on the indicators in the RMF and PMFs, which could have helped us in our ongoing work of further developing the RMF and PMFs. For the Secretariat, there are two key takeaways from the review. First, that the GCF needs an integrated, complete, and fit-for-purpose RMF to strengthen results management of the fund. And second, that the M&E gaps in the approved projects and programs should be addressed to mitigate reputational risk. The specific actions on how to implement these are summarized in the board decision text, which will come to later, which we'll come to later. Moving forward, the aforementioned takeaways can be addressed both at the Secretariat level and through the board mandate. At the Secretariat level, the Secretariat can continue with measures including revisions to funding proposal review process, relevant policies, formats, and templates to strengthen the results management in line with several of IU's recommendations. And two, it can also encourage AEs to adequately budget M&E costs at the design stage to ensure quality at entry of funding proposals. For the board, it may consider requesting the Secretariat to present an updated and an integrated results framework for the GCF, which may include the completion of indicator development, protocol, and guideline, as IEU in its presentation has recognized the Secretariat's strength in doing so. Furthermore, it may consider allocating resources to address M&E issues regarding data collection and baseline assessment identified by IU in previously approved projects and programs for which the Secretariat will develop a proposal for board's consideration at B23. Finally, coming to the summary decision text, the board requests the Secretariat, one, to present for the board's consideration an integrated results framework incorporating relevant board decisions, policies, and frameworks by B24. Two, to develop for the board's consideration at B23 a proposal to respond to gaps in the current portfolio for measurement and evaluation design and evidence generation. And three, to ensure that AEs should adequately provide budgets for data collection and baseline assessment as part of project costs to establish credibility of results reporting. This concludes the Secretariat management response. Thank you all very much. My team is here to answer any specific question that you may have in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohail. So what I'd like to do now is to invite comments on the executive questions here. Are we prepared to note the IEU findings? And are we prepared to charge the Secretariat to get on with the tasks outlined in the draft decision, as opposed to having a seminar on the philosophy for results management? So that's what I'd like to focus on. I'm in your hands, of course. You may wish to have a seminar. And very interesting, it would be too. But the time, I think, requires us to concentrate on the executive points at hand, if you would, please. But, of course, it's entirely up to members. I am going to start with Eamon.
Well, I was going to give you a seminar, but I'll make the seminar short, really, not a boring one. I thank you very much for the presentations on the evaluation and the reaction to the evaluation. But really, this is very important and essential for us as developing countries, is that what are we trying to assess here and the indicators that we're looking for and the context, how we're contextualizing the whole thing. And the context is so important that we should really know what the science is telling us, what the COP decisions are, and this should be the indicators for us. We came up from COP24 with decisions that address cross-cutting issues. And cross-cutting goes both ways. Mitigation with co-benefits of adaptation and vice versa. Adaptation with co-benefit of mitigation. And also, you cannot de-link development from climate actions. And you cannot de-link climate actions from the SDGs. And I refer you to the IPCC 1.5 report, figure SBM4, which lists all the 17 goals, and it shows you, which we really contested when we were doing the summary for policymakers, we contested how rosy and nice the graph was, showing that the relationship is all positive and synergies. This is the kind of evaluation I'd like you to undertake, and I'll just leave it there. I'd really want you to go and examine this figure of the IPCC SBM figure 4 that lists all the SDGs and see if we're achieving that through our actions here at the GCF. Thank you very much.
I'm grateful to you, Eamon, for that clear, succinct direction. It was exactly the right thing, if you'll allow me Thank you very much. Paul.
I would like to continue on the same line, Mr. Chair. If there's any result in the framework in GCF that's universally recognized by everyone, it's the parity between adaptation and mitigation. But yet we see that adaptation lags and lags and lags. And I was thinking this morning, as we looked at these large mitigation projects coming through, that's just getting worse and rather than better. And I think that it's not going to take care of itself. Supply and demand is not working. We have a market failure here. I don't think we're going to ever have adaptation get parity with mitigation if we do not take affirmative action. What could be an example of affirmative action? Ask the Secretariat at the next board meeting to come with twice as many adaptation projects by value as mitigation projects. And if we do that maybe once or twice, we could achieve parity. If not, we're never going to achieve it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Noted. Paul. Roelof.
Thank you, Chair. Well, thanking the IEU for great work done and Jo for her excellent presentation, I would like to make a few remarks. So our seat, Denmark, Luxembourg, Netherlands, really attaches great importance to good and reliable results reporting. Given that the GCF is the key financial mechanism under the UNFCCC, it is in fact the apex of the international climate finance architecture, it should set the standard for results reporting in the field of climate action. This is not a hollow phrase. For us in the Netherlands, we are waiting for that time when the GCF has such a results framework, and we are waiting for the moment to take over that framework and replace ours with it. We have great concern about some of the report's findings, and to address the current shortcomings, the recommendations in the evaluation report need urgent follow-up so as to ensure that the GCF will be able to report in a robust manner on achieved results soonest. As to the management response, we'd like to thank the Secretariat for it. We think it's a sufficient response, even though it could have exuded even a little more sense of urgency. We are pleased to see all the work done in 2018 on further development of indicators in the performance measurement framework. Moving forward, we propose the Secretariat present to the Board annually the progress made in the result management framework and with regard to GCF level indicators in the performance measurement framework. We support the draft decision. However, we would like to know how the Secretariat exactly plans to ensure that accredited entities adequately budget for the necessary data collection and baseline assessment as part of project costs. Without such provision in the budget, credibility of results reporting will not come about. Thank you very much.
Noted, Roelof, and I will put that specific question back to staff. I see next Sue.
Thank you very much. I'll aim to be brief, but Canada and Belgium would certainly like to underscore what Roelof just said about the utmost importance to the results frameworks. Very much appreciate the presentations and the response. Just to note that you also talked about how there were multiple frameworks in place. And so we just do want to highlight one potential danger that in presenting an integrated results framework, is this simply going to be built on the many layers that exist, or are we going to take some things offline as well? There is the danger that in the end we have so many things that end up creating a patchwork. So we'd also like to see some streamlining, simplification, and what is the framework that is the framework above all others. Thank you.
Yeah, so a clear need for some hierarchy, or we'll wind up doing everything and achieving nothing. Thanks for that, Sue. Leanne, and please bear in mind our time pressures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I try to be as brief as I can, and I speed through it. So we welcome the report by the IEU and the Secretariat's response. We note the important findings from the analysis of the IEU conducted of the portfolio last year, which identified some serious shortcomings. They are concerning, since reliable reporting and baselines are essential to understand whether the fund is having the impact as is mandated to effect towards a paradigm shift. The findings confirm the importance of having capacity and budget for monitoring and developing baselines, including for gender and sex disaggregated data. And we believe project preparation facility funding for direct access entities and others could be helpful to improve that gap. The review also identified flaws in the logic model for both mitigation and adaptation. As part of the efforts to update the performance measurement framework, CSOs encouraged the fund to move ahead with defining the Sustainable Development Portfolio Indicator within the mitigation PMF. This is an essential element that differentiates the GCF from other climate funds. We would like to see that made finally operational. We also call on the board to further refine the specific criterion associated to the expected results area 9.0 related to improved management of land or forest areas contributing to emissions reduction, and include an additional one to specify the number of hectares of forests or lands legally titled to indigenous peoples and traditional communities with knowledge and livelihood systems. On a similar note, and regarding recommendations from the IEU on complementarity and coherence, we note that while coherence and harmonization with results frameworks and definitions from other climate finance institutions might have benefits, it's also important that the fund is mindful of its mandate, which make it different from other climate finance sources. Where necessary, the fund needs to differentiate itself from results by other institutions. As for the proposed decision to the board, we note the requirement for EEs to include adequate costs for project monitoring and evaluation, and I think that's really, really important. Also regarding the proposed decision, as the Secretariat reviews the RMF and PMF, we encourage it and fund stakeholders as a whole to use this opportunity to identify ways in which the GCF can become a part of the data generation process through its project, which can fill important existing data gaps, including, for example, on project portfolio data on gender and climate change investment, especially in terms of adaptation and in financial intermediation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leanne. I'll come back to staff on some of those points as well. Next I have Paula.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Let me just state for the sake of the executive part that we support the draft decision. And I don't want to make a lecture. Let me just say one thing. That for us, knowing that a good chunk of GCF financing will not know if target impacts are occurring, and that 50% of the project have no baseline data, and that 90% are unable to assess or likely to overstate results, it's kind of a problem. And I tie this to the discussion we had yesterday on strategic programming to underscore the importance of this exercise. Thank you.
It's kind of a problem, all right. We completely agree with you on that, Paula, and thanks for underscoring it. Frank.
Thank you, Co-Chair. A couple of short remarks. I think I would join others in thanking the Evaluation Unit and the Secretariat for bringing this information to us. And it has its part of concern that we identified a lot of gaps. It's part of good news that it's easy to fix the gaps. And from our perspective, it's timely to fix the gaps now before we start programming for the replenishment period. And that is what should be done, because we not only need to know what the GCF does, but also what the GCF achieves as results. And with this said, I look forward for the proposals to improve the results management framework in a coherent way to tell us and guide us for the replenishment period. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. certainly timely as we heading into the next phase of GCF's work. Wael, please.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Again, like Paula, on the executive part, we have no problem with the decision, but there's just a couple of very brief points I'd like to highlight with regard to the IEU report. No doubt the results of the management framework are extremely important to assess the work of the GCF, but we believe that the framework must be consistent with and remain cognizant of the very objective of establishing the fund in the first place, which is assisting in the achievement of the desired paradigm shift in developing countries. Granted, this paradigm shift is easier to assess in mitigation and significantly more difficult when it comes to adaptation, as the IEU report rightly acknowledges. However, I think there are a couple of points we need to respect in the response to the report, especially on adaptation. One, we need to respect that adaptation is a national issue, and its impacts in some cases are difficult to assess beyond enhancing resilience of communities and infrastructure. Second thing is that it might be important to recall that the fund, of course, has no agreed full eligibility criteria. Absence of such criteria makes it even more difficult to assess results and effectiveness. Thus, it might be important to consider that the issue of identifying eligibility on the go is not sustainable, and there might be a need to work on an eligibility criteria document. In conclusion, we believe that the IEU findings are a good start, but more work needs to be done in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Wael. And I see parallels with remarks made earlier about remembering our foundations, and in remembering that one size doesn't fit all and that we can't indefinitely prescribe. We're going to have to leave some latitude for country circumstances. And clearly that's right. And thank you for reminding us of it. So there's a gap to close, but we won't close it utterly. That's just, there'll have to be some room. Thank you for that. Jeremiah.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We also quickly join and associate ourselves with previous speakers on the matter or the executive part of this document. We also do support. We agree with previous speaker. We also want to recognize and commend the IEU for the work done. The findings for us very good. Not repeating everything else people have said, I just wanted to speak specifically to the lack of baseline data element as noted. As we move forward in whichever direction we move toward, we have to recognize the fact that certain countries absolutely lack data and the infrastructure that would generate the data. And this is common in least developed country, developing countries like Africa, CET, and some part. So we have to ask ourselves, not only that we notice that some of the funding proposals and everything we have now lack data, but the reality is that how do we begin to address this issue by having this kind of infrastructure in place over the period of time such that we have what we want? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremiah. That's consistent with some of the earlier points as well, that we need to react to the world as we find it and improve it so far as is possible, given country circumstances. Kate.
Thank you. I was debating whether to come in on this agenda item or the next one, but I think the two are slightly converging into one. So in the interest of time, I'll just make my comments on this decision and the next one together, because I don't have too much to say apart from welcoming the report, like others have done, and the Secretariat's response and action plan. This is a really important area. Other people have said this, but as we've said in many discussions already over the last day and a half, understanding our results and our impact is absolutely critical to the success of the fund. So we actually know if we're having the impact that we want, the impact that we need, and that we can carry on actually improving and enhancing that impact. I also understand quite how complex this area is, particularly from our work on Investment Committee, where we've looked at many of these aspects of the results management framework and the different parts that come into play. So we really look forward to the update at B24 on the Secretariat's progress against recommendations, and really would encourage urgency on that, given the importance of this area. And on the next decision as well, just for the management response and action plan, we think this is heading in the right direction, but really needs some continued efforts from the Secretariat and others to respond to those gaps, and then look at the budget as well. So again, encouraging ambition and urgency on that as well. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Kate. And also thank you very much, members, for concentrating so firmly on the executive elements. It's much appreciated. Staff, there have been some specific questions, budgeting for the AEs, whether or not this is in fact going to lead to a rationalisation or just a bigger heap at the end of the day, and how we might tackle the baseline data points. Could you just speak to those, please? And do you think that that means we need to change the executive decision, or do you think you can accommodate those points within them as it is? I'd like your opinion on that, please.
Starting from the...
Yeah, yes, indeed.
Starting from your last point, the decision does include the things, and we are very thankful for the support to moving forward and the urgency. Both things are important. The contextualization is important. We have mentioned the SDGs. If we look at the 6 recommendations, I'm sorry, I'm just covering the few things. Recommendation 6, the SDGs, we are very cognizant about that, and we have done that. Specifically coming to the issue of rationalization, complementarity, coherence, I mean, when we started doing the exercise in 2017, that was our starting point. I can assure you that when we set foot on making this comparison, even though there were comments and there were, good advices that we should not follow blindly, but we cannot reinvent the wheel. We cannot start from ground zero. There is a lot of work which has gone in, and we had made that start consciously. That if we look at Annex 3 in the B20 document, it points out on the coherence, complementarity, harmonization, rationalization. We have taken them as our guidelines. And going forward on the indicators, responding to the points, we are very much cognizant, especially me belonging to a developing country. I know very much on the data constraints, on the institutional constraints. So we are going to follow the simple, comprehensible, implementable approach. That would be our 3 guiding lights. So, I'm trying to kind of touch upon that this is a very complex undertaking, and we really look forward to your support. And we really appreciate the IU's recognition that we have the competency to address it. And please give us that mandate. I need the mandate from the board to go ahead and develop the indicators. We'll bring it to you, you endorse it, and we go for it. Thank you very much.
Joe.
Very briefly, Chair. Thank you. And I just wanted to acknowledge a few of the points, especially, so Ayman and I think Leanne and Paula and Frank all made it as well. I think for the indicator framework and for the RMF, we are not suggesting that there be a whole lot of more other indicators, etc. I think the key point that we are making with the evaluation is that there has been there's been a shortcoming in the implementation of a framework that already exists. It exists, and currently the way it's interpreted, both internally as well as externally, and most of this is a consequence of the lack of guidance, protocol development, standards development, etc. All of that is required. And that's really the guts of any framework that needs to be useful. So it's not creating a completely new framework. It's let's take that framework but make that useful. Otherwise, don't use it.
Yes, so it is a case of using it, or you might as well lose it.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Joe. That's the second. I'm impressed by this is the second occasion in this meeting where we've had lessons learned, and we've been able to take something from that and come to a clear executive pointer for staff, and that staff are keen to get on. It's good. It feels right. Could I come then to the functional part of the decisions themselves, please, colleagues? First, GCF B2207. in respect of the IEU report, which is simple and straightforward. It acknowledges that and makes reference to the work needed for B24. Are we in a position to agree that? It's so agreed. And then next, of course, to the thing that naturally follows, document GCF B2207 add 1, which is the management response they're undertaking to get on with what we've charged them to do for B23 and subsequently for B24. Are we in a position to approve that? We are. Thank you very much indeed.